I'm Tenitra Batiste, and it's not list season, but mock draft season kind of feels about the same.
I'm Aaron Freeman, and the birds are chirping, the flowers are out, which definitely means it's mock draft season.
I'm Jarvis Davis, and I am so excited who fell to me in my mock draft.
ATL!
Rise up, A-Town. It's the Falcons squad. Everything Atlanta Falcons every week. Breaking down all the big hits and game-changing plays from the ATL. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. Straight from the ATL, the Falcons Squad Show starts now.
Falcons Squad Show, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Locked On Falcons host Aaron Freeman and Locked On analyst Jarvis Davis. And the Squad Show is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. So free agency was solid, but we'll talk about if the draft haul can be better for the Falcons, and are the Falcons headed for a reset or a rebirth? We'll discuss. Also, the Falcons get a win, a big win over the Bears. We'll download on it, but first, the countdown to the draft has begun, and it's time to get into mock drafts. So over the next few weeks that we await the commencement of the 2026 NFL draft, we'll take you through our mock draft. Now, the Falcons, of course, they'll skip a day because we won't be talking about anybody in all likelihood that the Falcons will draft day one, although we know that they can potentially find themselves negotiating their way back into maybe a late first-round pick. That's not out of the question. We saw it happen last year. But as of today, the Falcons have the number 48 overall pick in the second round, the number 79 overall pick in the third round, number 122 in the fourth round, number 215 in the sixth round, both of those via the Philadelphia Eagles, and number 231 in the seventh round. So let's start in the second round. Jarvis, where do you see the Falcons going with the 48th pick?
Well, I like to have a nice little cheat code when it comes to, evaluating who I feel will be available at the second round. So I use my little mock draft simulator, I was playing around with it a little bit earlier, and I was able to land on a guy by the name of Caleb Banks, a defensive tackle out of Florida, super long, broke a record for wingspan as a defensive tackle, just absolutely looking like I was about to say something that wouldn't have been appropriate, but someone when he stands up, he almost can touch his knees, like just follow the picture that I'm trying to paint here. Yes. But when you look at the way that he played ball, right, there was definitely some inconsistencies there. And then when I got a chance to get my eyes on him down in the Senior Bowl, it quite showed too much of that first day. But oh my gosh, those next couple of days, he really showed what he can potentially be. And I think that it's going to take the right coach, to be able to, hone him in and make sure he's giving you, what exactly what you need on a play in, play out basis, because that's how it works in the NFL. And I think if the Falcons were able to pick up a guy like Caleb Banks, they'd be loading up pretty quickly when it comes to just high level talent that needs a little bit of teaching and to be able to, be the guy that you drafted him to be.
So sort of considered a high upside type of pick, that D tackle out of Florida. Like you said, massive size, 6'6", 327, can dominate inside. But are you concerned, Jarvis, about the fact that a couple of weeks ago, he did have to have foot surgery, although it was successful foot surgery, to repair that fractured fourth bone in his left foot?
No, not really. Because we're in April right now. And I think that, the Falcons have done enough from a depth perspective when it comes to free agency, at that position. So you don't need him to come in and start for you right away. So that's why I say it's a kind of like a win-win for the Falcons, because they did what they need to do in free agency. So they won't be coming into this draft with a desperate need, right? So I think that the Falcons will be in a good space. And I believe that Nate Ollie is a guy that can work with him, because we saw that jump that Dorless had, with Nate Ollie at the helm. So, yeah, this is a beautiful thing when we're talking about coaches elevating guys to a level where you feel they could be strong contributors, starters for you for the near future.
And you're right, that surgery actually happened almost a month ago. And when you look at the initial recovery time, it's 4 to 6 weeks. So in theory, he's already gotten through that first phase of recovery. And then you've got that next phase of recovery where he'll be kind of walking in the boot, and then eventually will be walking in about 6 to 12 weeks. So yeah, Jarvis, when you paint that timeline, certainly for that type of surgery, it does bode well, and you can be and should be optimistic about the fact that if the Falcons should select Caleb at number 48, that he will be ready when it's most important, which is for training camp. What about you, Aaron? When you look at that number 48 pick, where would you like the Falcons to go?
I would like them to go for a premium position. And I think cornerback is the one that kind of stands out to me, just because we have discussed this over and over again with the revolving door opposite AJ Terrell. And if you can get the right cornerback at that pick 48 spot, I think that will go a long way to at least solidifying that situation so that the Falcons can focus on the trenches and other areas of need later in the draft, where I think there's a little bit more depth in this draft class. And so for me, the corner that I have kind of circled for the Falcons at pick 48 is Chris Johnson out of San Diego State, who we also saw at the Senior Bowl. Has a skill set, I think, that is very reminiscent of AJ Terrell's in terms of like he can be, let's say, 85% the player that AJ Terrell is. And like that to me is a pretty good number 2 corner, if you ask me. I think Johnson brings, decent size, decent athleticism, and plays hard, has a physical disposition. I always love a quarterback that's willing to mix it up in the run game. That always gets bonus points for me. And I think Chris Johnson brings that sort of feistiness when it comes to run support and whatnot. So I think he makes a ton of sense for the Falcons. If he's there, we'll see if he's there. I've seen so many people over the last couple of weeks being like, oh, who's my draft crush? Chris Johnson, and whatnot. And I'm just like, oh, okay. Like everybody likes this guy. And so the question is going to be, does the NFL like him the same level, to the point that, rather than being talked about as a second round pick, could he potentially sneak into round 1 and whatnot? But, where he's currently projected to go is sort of that early to middle part of round 2. And so I do think he'll be an option for the Falcons at 48.
Yeah, and I forgot to ask you this, Aaron, so I'm going to sneak this in real quick, and then Jarvis, I'll come back to you as well. Because I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on each other's mock draft picks too. So, Aaron, if we could take a step back real quick, what are your thoughts on Jarvis's selection in his mock draft for 48?
I love Caleb Banks. He's my top D tackle in this draft class. When you have his size, his physical ability, when we talk about these big D tackles, like you're looking for that dancing bear. I don't know if that's the inappropriate comparison that Jarvis was going to make a little bit earlier. It didn't sound like he was going down that path, but
no, but I think dancing bear is safe, Free.
Yeah,
that's very safe, very safe, very safe.
And I think that's really what describes Caleb Banks. And when you talk about, as Jarvis said, when you talk about what Nate Ollie's bringing, like a guy that has his explosiveness and quickness at his size, like that is just like, catnip to Nate Ollie of like, when he's preaching get off and all that stuff. Like, it's just like, this is the type of player that he's looking for in terms of that sort of explosiveness. The real concern with Caleb Banks is the injuries, right? Because you talk about that foot surgery that he had, but like, I believe it's like the 3rd foot surgery he's had in like the last 2 years. And so like, that's the main concern, where it's just like, does he keep having these foot problems because he's a little hefty, because it doesn't quite heal carrying all that mass. And so that's really the one issue. So maybe you come in and you're like, oh, drop 10 pounds and maybe that will solve the problem. Maybe we'll get some NFL doctors and whatnot that will make this a non-issue moving forward. But like, that's to me, the real biggest knock on him is just like the durability concerns. But as far as a football player goes, he may not be as polished as some of these other D tackles in this draft class, but in terms of like the high ceiling, I just think it's way higher than anybody else in this draft class. And when you're talking about pick 48, it's like, let's swing for the fences, because this absolutely could be like a Keem Hicks, Dexter Lawrence type of player, if we can develop that type of player, and having that type of disruptive presence in the middle of your D-line is just going to do wonders for this defense moving forward.
Yeah, and for you, Jarvis, when you think about Free's pick of Chris Johnson at 48, what do you like about that pick, or what are your concerns about it?
What I like about it is that, hey, it's a guy that can play opposite AJ Terrell that, has enough upside to be in that particular position. You're not trying to get a older guy who used to be good in the league and hopefully trying to hit for a year or two. And I think that if the Falcons were to go with a guy like Chris Johnson, I feel like he would be the exact opposite of that, right? He'll be the guy you can say, hey, we can slot this guy next to AJ Terrell and hopefully be there for the next 4 to 5 or 6 years or however long, he's able to stick around, or to be able to get that second contract, because that's what tells you if that was a successful pick or not. If you're able to get him to a second contract, or he's able to earn a second contract with his team, that lets you know that that was a hit. And that's all this team needs right now, is getting a hit. Now, the only thing I would probably say that I wouldn't necessarily say it's a concern, but just from what this defense is trying to do, just from being able to play that man coverage and everything like that. He has good ball skills, don't get me wrong, but if you talking about putting him in a spot where, hey, we're going to play 65%, 70% man coverage, and we might play zone from time to time, I don't know if that necessarily matches up with his skill set and what he's able to do best. And, Jeff always talking about, hey, we want to put players in a position to have success. Now, will he switch it up for a guy like Chris Johnson? Maybe mix matches a little bit, maybe. But yeah, that's the only thing I see there. Okay, because he's more of a match zone type guy, being able to see play off the ball a little bit and be able to see that ball a little bit more clearly. But yeah, I think right now, I wouldn't be mad at a Chris Johnson pick at all.
Yeah. And Free, when you look at the scouting report on Chris Johnson, you see the positives of things like high football IQ, like you feel that many feel AJ Terrell has, or excellent ball production. He's that kind of ball hawk that you need, because let's just say the Falcons were somewhat starving for interceptions or turnovers last season. So that could be a positive. Strong physical presence. And however, going back to some of the concerns that Jarvis might have, also the scouting report said recovery speed, if he's beating at the line, kind of average. And then that kind of ghost in the machine from maybe seasons past, whenever there's this big bodied receiver, and how they kind of body the Falcons secondary. But what are your concerns? Do you have any concerns about him being at that 48 pick for the Falcons?
Not particularly. Again, we're kind of grading on a curve a little bit, where it's just like you're not getting a perfect player at pick 48,
right?
As opposed to, if this was pick 16 or something like that, we could be like, well, he doesn't do this quite as well. At pick 48, it's like, hey, do you have strengths?
Yes.
Do you have clear strengths that we can build as part of our defense? And I think Chris Johnson has that. So, like, we can sit here and nitpick and be like, this is why he's not a top 20 pick versus, being a middle of the second round pick and whatnot. But for me, like, most of those concerns are just like relatively minor issues for me that I'm not going to sit here and go like, oh, well, that's why you wouldn't pick him at pick 48. So for me, like, most of those issues are pretty much non-issues, even though they're not technically non-issues, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally. And just to kind of throw you guys a curveball, just knowing what the Falcons have done of recent with the likes of getting like a Stephen Drummond into their front office, and just understanding, hey, you lost out a lot. Caden Ellis being one of the examples, but you did lose a couple in the offseason. We'll talk about another one, and maybe a potential replacement for him and Tyler Algier. But I was thinking, okay, maybe there's a trend as far as these UGA players are concerned, especially because they drafted Jalen Walker last year, drafted him high, and he was pretty solid. And you could say he was even trending up to being more than solid and better than average once the injuries were kind of behind him. So maybe they'll sneak a look. It depends on maybe a Christian Miller possibility. He might be available. It depends, because some say that he's a second round pick. Some say that he's a late first round pick, if you will. But 6'4", 320, elite run defense skills, a disruptor. I don't know. I kind of thought, just to kind of go in a slightly different direction from you guys, maybe he's a possibility. But what do you guys like about Christen Miller? What are you guys' concerns about him?
My biggest, what I like about him, and I'm not going to even mention my concerns because, like we're talking about the second round draft, like Free mentioned, elite run stopper. Oh my gosh, the Falcons need that like yesterday. Guys who are committed to stopping the run, and I think that's an old school type guy that the Falcons need, and you can just pack him right down there on first and second down, and then as the season goes along or as his career goes along, he can figure out how to be able to push that pocket of the middle and be able to put the quarterback on the ground. But when you're talking about having that type of trait at the top of your scouting report, man, that's exactly what the Falcons need. And if they were able to get him, I would not be mad at that at all.
Yeah, same for me. I think the thing I like about Christen Miller is the combination of pass rushing and run stopping relative to some of a lot of these other guys are like, well, he's just a pass rusher. And the other guy's like, well, he's just a run stopper. And I think Miller has the right balance of both. That makes you feel really good about his upside in both of those areas. And to the point that he might be my number 2 D tackle after Caleb Banks in this draft class, because you have that 3-down ability as opposed to some of these other guys where it's like, yeah, you don't really see it in terms of the 3-down ability. So he makes a ton of sense if he's there for the Falcons at pick 48. And one of the things I've noticed that I find fascinating is just looking at some various draft boards and sort of seeing a little bit of a slide for Christen Miller when it comes to post-combine. And so I'm wondering if there was something that teams found out about the combine that they were they don't like. Because looking at various consensus draft boards over the last couple of days and weeks, he's not as high as he was ranked in February. And so I do wonder if a little bit there's a greater possibility that he will be there for the Falcons at pick 48. So that is just something I've noticed. Again, it could be nothing or whatever, but it is just something that I've noticed a little bit, that his consensus ranking is a couple of spots lower today than it was maybe 2 months ago. And so maybe that means there's a greater probability that he could be there for the Falcons at 48.
Yeah. And one other question for you guys before we wrap up our talk on what the Falcons will do at pick 48. Either of you thinking that the Falcons will either go back or try to get back into maybe the late round of the first draft and use this as a pawn, or do you think maybe they'll even move back in the draft, meaning back in the second round, in order to get any additional assets?
Yeah, trading back is way higher possible.
That's the only option.
I think there's a 0% chance that they trade up in this draft, right? Never say never with the Falcons, but I don't think Ian would do that. He doesn't seem about that life. Not with his first pick. Now, maybe later in the draft, maybe, I don't know, but not with the first pick.
Fair enough.
No, not going to happen first round.
No. To going back in the first round, or no, what about no to going back in the second round?
Going back second round, I could definitely see that happen. Absolutely. If there's an opportunity, I think Ian's going to take it.
Yeah.
Indeed. So, yeah, I think you guys are probably right about that. This is one of those where to get to fill the need of what the Falcons want or desire, whether it's best player available or like I said, position of need, they can still probably get what they want without giving away any assets to get into the first round. I think there's more than enough out there to fit their needs. You guys have mentioned it. I talked about it as well, so that they don't have to do that. I agree with you guys. I see Ian Cunningham more as trying to stack some assets as opposed to trying to give away assets that, quite honestly, really doesn't have. Now, free agency, as we said, was solid, but we'll continue our talk about the draft haul and if that can be even better for the Falcons when we take it under further review. This episode of our Falcon Squad Show is brought to you by Indeed. Workplace chaos, deadlines stacking up, inbox overflowing, and the one position you have to still fill is sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Sponsored Jobs. Indeed Sponsored Jobs helps you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for: skills, experience, location, so you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I've been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spending less time searching, that's what you want to do. And you want to spend more time than interviewing candidates who check all your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. When you need the right person to cut through the chaos, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. And here's the thing, listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored jobs credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support our show by saying you heard about it on this podcast. Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? This is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Thank you for making the Falcon Squad Show your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. So as I mentioned, over the next few weeks ahead of the draft, we'll take you through our mock drafts. And now that we've talked second round options, let's dive into the third round. Where do you stand, Aaron, as far as where the Falcons are going with the 79th pick?
Well, I'm, I want to get a wide receiver, right? And I think the depth of this draft class allows that the Falcons don't have to feel as much pressure to get that guy in round 2.
Yeah.
And I'm vamping a little bit because I haven't come up with exactly the wide receiver I want for the Falcons in round 3. But like, as I sit here and think about, okay, what do I want? I want someone that has a complementary skill set to Drake London. And mainly what I'm looking for is much more of that sort of explosive, take the top off ability for the defense. And so for me, I'm probably going to go with Ted Hurst out of Georgia State. Brings the size that you want, maybe a little bit raw coming from the smaller school, but I do think there's some developmental upside for Ted Hurst to kind of be, maybe not a poor man's version, but a middle-class version, let's say, of George Pickens in terms of what we saw George Pickens do in Pittsburgh, a guy that can kind of specialize as that sort of vertical threat on the outside opposite while you let Drake London do all the sort of eating stuff over the middle in the slot and Drake London be your do everything wide receiver, and Ted Hurst, you can just kind of, when we need you to stretch the defense, you can go out there and do that. I also think he's been a plus in the red zone. He's also been a very good after the catch guy as well. So I think there's a lot of overall ability in Ted Hurst. It just hasn't quite manifested itself fully at this stage, but I think you feel good about the developmental upside that he has. And so for me, Ted Hurst out of Georgia State, the wide receiver, is my third round pick.
Okay. So you have that opportunity or the potential for the Falcons to try to go local with the pick, and also maybe pushing back that wide receiver to the third round. And I can see that, because for me, I wasn't, how we kind of all look at mock drafts just to kind of see, we throw them in the simulator, if you will, and we try to figure out, okay, where did the simulators have these prospects? So I agree with you. I think that third round is probably where the Falcons should go for a wide receiver. Ted Hurst seems like one who, hey, if you had a 4.4 40-yard dash, I think that's a starting point, right? About 200 pounds, if you will. So probably got some craftiness, some shiftiness. And again, we never mind a local player. But for you, Jarvis, when you think about Ted Hurst and kind of what he brings to the table, almost 2,000 receiving yards, 15 touchdowns over the last couple of seasons. What did you, before or after, transferring from Valdosta State, what do you think about him as a possibility at 79?
I look at a guy who was able to capitalize on, his ability to be able to go from a D2 school like a Valdosta State to go to Georgia State and be able to make himself into an NFL prospect, right? That's the type of stuff that you look for, guys who have a certain type of mindset. It takes a certain type of mindset to be able to go from D2 up to Georgia State, and now you're making a jump into the NFL. Those are some of the things that you pay attention to. Small school guys, I call them chip on the shoulder guys. Look what he did at the Senior Bowl. He was consistently out there making a name for himself. boosting his draft stock. You saw a lot of people talking about Ted Hurst after down his performance down there in Mobile, Alabama. So for me, I would love to see the Falcons bring a guy like Ted Hurst in, because that makes, because he's not going to be under pressure to play. Again, going back to what the Falcons did in free agency, you bring in a guy like a Jahan Dotson, you bring in a guy like Olamide Zaccheaus, and you put those two guys with a Drake London, you got at least a solid wide receiver room, right? Mm-hmm. But if you bring in a young guy that could potentially develop, come in, no pressure to play, and then eventually come into what he's been doing leading up to coming on his team, that's a recipe for success in my eyes. So yeah, if Ted Hurst puts on that black and red uniform, I feel like this Ian he'll be cooking with grease if he's able to pull a guy like that.
Yeah, and for you, Jarvis, where would you like to see the front office for the Falcons go at the 79th pick?
I'm going to stay on the defense side of the football team. I don't care about wide receivers and stuff like that. I know I just talked about them, but I don't really care about them boys like that. They don't matter to me. Mm-hmm. Like, you mean go back to the defense side of football. So I'm going to go with a guy, young man, 5'11", 185. Oh, Jarvis, that man sound a little small. Yes, I understand it. But Chandler Rivers, the cornerback out of Duke, man, you talking about physicality. You talking about exactly what Jeff Ulbrich is looking for as a defense coordinator's team, how he wants to play, the style he wants to play with. It is a match made in heaven. I think Aaron made a great point when you talk about, like, yeah, you can point out some deficiencies, right? 185, yeah, that's real light. But when you turn on the tape, man, you see something different. You see a guy playing up, from his size standpoint. So I think the physicality is a piece that would make him a perfect fit for the Falcons if he's sitting there available. I was kind of surprised. I was going through my little simulation and everything. I didn't expect him to be there, so I was like, oh, okay, let me go ahead and pick him up, because I think he's a guy that, again, so we can stop spinning the wheel of randos playing next to AJ Terrell. I feel like he'll be a guy that you can put in day one as that guy opposite of AJ.
And Aaron, what do you think about going back to defense and going corner for that third round pick?
Well, I would love to sit here and poke holes in Jarvis's, defensive forward strategy, but I'm not, because I'm a big fan of Chandler Rivers. He's a smaller guy. I've been very public about not necessarily wanting more small corners in that room, more shrimps, as we say. But this is a gourmet shrimp. This is that fancy.
Wait. So free. He's not from the bargain aisle.
No. This is not reduced meat. This is
reduced meat aisle. He's not the reduced meat aisle.
This is the fancy. This is the shrimp behind the glass cage that you have to specifically order from the meat section in.
You got to eat with the good cocktail sauce.
Yeah, you got to actually talk to
you have to have your cocktail sauce
to order this shrimp. This is not the bag of frozen shrimp that's tucked in the back in the back freezer that you normally see. That's just the cheap stuff, right? This is a gourmet. This, it says farmed in like the Philippines or Spain or the Mediterranean. It's a fancy shrimp. That's basically what I'm getting at. And so I'm a fan of Chandler Rivers. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me, he's a really smart player. And I love that Duke would move him all around their secondary. Like, sometimes they have him play a little safety and they play a little nickel, play a little outside. And like, you didn't really see any drop off in his ability, whether it came to his awareness, where it came to his coverage ability. And so this is one of those players that, like, to me, even though he's a smaller guy and that's going to present challenges in the NFL where, they are bigger and faster and all that stuff. But like, I just saw on film, to me, a guy that seemed like he just he checked all the boxes you were looking for, with the exception of just being vertically challenged. Like, that's the one knock on him. But I think he has everything that you were looking for to overcome those things. And so as far as like third round picks, again, like, normally I'd be like, oh no, another shrimp, whatever. But like, this is a gourmet shrimp. This is that fancy cocktail sauce, all that stuff. Peeled and deveined, all ready to go. So I like Chandler Rivers.
Kind of like a Buckhead special, it sounds like. So and I think you guys, there's, you know how sometimes when we're looking at the scouting reports, we have all the things that you guys mentioned just in terms of elite quickness and technical skills and how he plays the slot, regardless of the fact that he might have a smaller frame. But there's one thing that I saw that I thought was really interesting and that I thought, okay, this may have some possibility just in terms of the intangibles. You know how we're always saying, who's the dog on this defense? Who's the dog on this team? Who's just going to get after it? And that's what has been like a lot of the scouting reports, a lot of the mock drafts for him. That's what they say. He's a dog. So maybe what you don't have in stature, Chandler Rivers, you kind of make up for and how you get after it. But I got a question for you guys as far as, and for Chandler, I think you guys both mentioned the one kind of knock or the one kind of concern, which is not a super concern for you guys, is really just his length and just his frame. But I was kind of surprised that neither of you went with one of two that I kind of bantered back and forth with, just because I think we talked about him a little bit on the show, and there's been a lot of connection points to him with a number of mock drafts, and that's Malik Muhammad. But also I'm starting to see Avion Terrell jump into the conversation as 79 for the Falcons. And so I just wanted to kind of ask you guys from that perspective, you know, with Malik Muhammad, considering that he has that high IQ, that hip movement that we all talk about that's so very important, kind of what you guys' thoughts were on him, upside, and what your concerns were, but also the fact that Avion Terrell, now it depends, because some say he's still going to be second round, early second round, but if he should fall a little bit to that third round, what your thoughts might be on him or any concerns you might have. So let's start with Malik Muhammad.
I like Malik Muhammad. You know, like he feels like a third round pick that you draft, you develop, and you're like, okay, well, we're going to groom you to take over from Mike Hughes in like 2 years, as opposed to, you know, for me, more of a plug and play, like come in right away and push for that starting spot opposite AJ Terrell. And so, like, as far as like that sort of developmental prospect, I think Muhammad brings a lot to the table. So I do like him in that way. But, you know, I think obviously I would, you know, prefer someone that could be more of a plug and play starter at that spot. But as far as the third round goes, like, you know, I think you're doing a solid job with a guy like Malik Muhammad.
Yeah, for me, I mean, as far as Malik Muhammad, he doesn't really move the needle for me. But I do think Avion Terrell is an interesting piece, because when you look at what he's slated to play, which is nickel mostly, if I'm Billy Bowman and the Falcons draft Avion Terrell, I'll be concerned. I'll be very concerned, because Avion Terrell is a day one nickel starter for me. Like the way he plays, the physicality he plays with, he plays up. You know, he's not the biggest guy in the world, but he does play up. So I think that, you know, he's a guy that you can drop right there at that nickel spot. And again, if they do draft him in the third round, I'll be very concerned about Mr. Billy Bowman, you know, because nickel money is different than dime money. Just saying.
Also, real quick, guys, Aaron, Jarvis, for you guys, whether it's the second round, that 48th pick, or pick number 79 in the third round, is there any position or player where you say, oh, hell no, like Falcons don't do it, reconsider, read your literature? No, on a position or a player at 48 or 79.
Quarterback is the one position where I'm just like, I don't need another high round quarterback into the mix to overly complicate, you know, this current situation. Just wait till 2027. Give Michael Penix the runway that he needs. See whatever you got into you know, even throw Trevor Siemian out there if you need him or whatever. Like I don't need a early round quarterback that's just going to confuse everybody. Well, who's really the guy, and who's this guy, and is this Kevin Stefanski's guy, or is this Tommy Reese? Like I don't need to deal with any of that nonsense this summer. So just punt on the quarterback.
For me, it got to be running back. Please don't do it. Don't do it in the second and third round. We don't need to see any running backs going right now. I think we're good. you just figure it out. Find another position to return kicks for you. I don't need to see a running back at the top part of this drive at all.
Ooh, this is going to be such a fun next segment because you guys are saying no on a QB early, no on a running back early. We're talking visits next up. This episode of our Falcon Squad show is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, where every possession matters, every matchup is magnified, and every game can swing a series. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a great way to get in on the action. Here's what you're going to like about it. You can bet just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. The app makes it easy to follow the action with player stats, trends, and matchups all in one place. And during the playoffs, that extra insight really matters when you're looking at stars, role players, and key moments. Just makes the entire playoff experience more engaging from start to finish. So you can head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel is where you can play your game, and you definitely want to go to the website to look up the current lines and the odds. I mean, it's getting really tight, especially over in the Western Conference, because right now you're looking at the Oklahoma City Thunder as being the odds-on favorites to come out of the West. There's an intriguing, even though it's not as far as playoffs go, but somewhat some implications there because even that MVP race is tightening up. 1-2 punch between Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Victor Wembanyama. So don't forget that you can bet just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins, and playoffs are approaching for the NBA, and the app makes it easy to follow the action with player stats, trends, and matchups all in one place. So head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. Well, Aaron, I think I heard, oh, hell no, for a quarterback in one of the first picks, when like the second round pick for the Falcons or the third round pick, but maybe you'd be a little bit more intrigued or okay with it being a later round pick. The reason I mention that is because there are multiple reports out there that say that Haynes King, and Ian Rappaport of NFL Network reported it first, that he's slated to visit with the Falcons and also with the Panthers this week. Of course, started at Texas A&M, transferred to Georgia Tech, started 36 games for the Yellow Jackets, completed almost 70% of his passes, almost 3,000 yards, 14 touchdowns, and just 6 interceptions. And he was closing in on the 1,000-yard rushing season with 15 rushing touchdowns. Now, he's projected right now, Aaron, to be anywhere between like the 6th and 7th round. So I think we're okay that they're not going to go after him, the Falcons, for him to be their second or third round pick. But how would you feel if they did potentially pick him with one of their later picks?
Now, this is more what I'm talking about, Tate, right? This Haynes King in round 6 or 7 makes a lot more sense to me, where it's just like, okay, you're clearly drafting him to be the long-term backup. And the thing about Haynes King that you love is that he is tough as nails. And especially the one thing that he can do for this team right away is be the QB sneak guy, right? Because Michael Penix don't do QB sneaks.
Right.
Really don't do QB sneaks. I don't think they're going to trot out Trevor Siemian out there to do QB sneaks. So let's get Haynes King out here to go do some QB sneaks. We get into short yardage situations. Don't have to overcomplicate it, because like that was a problem with the Falcons the last couple of years with their short yardage run team being so terrible, because they couldn't do simple QB sneaks on 3rd and 1, because they had to get up under center and they had to hand the ball off to Bijan, and they got to hope that Elijah Wilkinson or somebody else doesn't blow the block and all that stuff, and
jump outside.
And it was just a whole mess of things for the Falcons in short yardage the last couple of years. And now you bring in a guy like Haynes King, you can say, hey, Haynes, just go out there, do what you do best, just go be tough, go get that yard so we can move these chains and get back to the sideline, Haynes. We don't need you in there for longer than that. And then you can develop Haynes over the next couple of years, be a solid backup. Maybe come up with some Taysom Hill like plays for him to take advantage of the athleticism and toughness that he brings to the table. Not necessarily a long term bet in terms of like a future starter, but like could be a solid role player for you down the road that at the very least can go out there be your secret weapon when it comes to third one.
And Jarvis, I know, of course, you cover Georgia Tech. You are one of the hosts for our Locked On Jackets podcast. So I know that you've probably seen a lot and followed a lot of what Haynes has been able to do, especially this past season. What do you think about the possibility of the Falcons taking him in one of the later rounds and maybe having a visit with him later this week as it's being reported?
Two things that come to mind that I feel that make him a perfect fit for Georgia. But not for Georgia Tech. He played for Georgia Tech. For the Atlanta Falcons. Yes. Yeah. The first thing is he could potentially be a Saints killer because Taysom Hill was a Falcons killer for a very long time. And somebody that I was so surprised that he was able to come in and be effective, even dropping back to pass the football for whatever reason. I just don't understand it. Still trying to figure that one out to this day. So yeah, if they can get him in the building and say, hey man, you're going to be our third and short guy, like Freeman mentioned. And when we play against that team in the black and gold, yeah, we're gonna make sure we put some special packages in for you, so we can make sure that you continue to kill the team that we need to kill twice a year. So yeah, but not in all seriousness though. And I think the second part is like we talking about a locker room guy.
Yeah,
man, Haynes is that dude. Man, that man is absolutely loved over there on the flats. And when you think about how he's looked and how he's looked at, how he's revered. Like Brent Key still talks about Haynes King to this day. When talking about his current guys on his current situation on his roster, he compares certain guys to Haynes King. Like, hey, if you have a guy like Haynes King, this is what you do. You know, you can be successful. So yeah, like I think he'll be the perfect match. You won't have to worry about anything off the field. So yeah, he's the type of guy that I feel that can come in and get with a certain team and be a long-term backup for you and be in the league for the next 6 or 7 years if he wants to, because that's just the type of guy that he is.
And I go back to that Georgia Tech game from season before last, right? 2024. And he just reminds me of the guy where you know what Georgia Tech's going to call. Doesn't matter. Haynes King is still going to get it done. Like that's who he reminds me of. And of course, you have all of the comparisons to Taysom Hill, if you will. So yeah, it might be good if the Falcons can get somebody in the 6th or 7th round, or even a priority UDFA who looks like Taysom Hill, but can do that same thing and be that counter punch for the Falcons, running a 4.46 at the forward in the 40-yard dash at the combine, and just what he was able to do, like you guys said, a short yardage machine, if you will. And maybe, I don't know, low key, if there's an opportunity for him to be developed, I think he has a better upside as a third string QB for the Falcons than with Trevor Siemian. So yeah, I think it could be a win-win situation for them as well. And one other guy that we didn't get a chance to talk about who visited the Falcons recently ahead of the draft was Arkansas running back prospect Mike Washington Jr., who's projected to be a mid-round draft pick, rushed for over 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, 6.4 yards per carry, and is currently ranked 71 overall on that Pro Football Focus big board. But the reason I mentioned that as well is because, like Jarvis said, no hell to the no for a running back in the first couple of rounds. But maybe, just maybe, you sneak in, because mid-round could, doesn't necessarily have to mean third round either. So you could maybe get him in. But for me, I think more of the question was, what does this visit maybe tell you about the kind of player the Falcons are looking to add to the running back room?
Yeah, I think most likely see if he can do something on special teams for you. I think because from a return standpoint, it's been a little dormant for the past few years. So I think if you can get someone that can potentially come in and utilize that speed in the return game, I think that would be do wonders for the Falcons, because I know my boy Craig is looking to have somebody come in and be that dynamic guy. T, don't look at me like that.
It's funny, man.
I hope you got the reference. I hope you got the reference.
Yes, that black card will not be revoked because of that movie, I assure you, or that franchise, because I've actually seen them all.
Okay, thank you. But no, I think if they bring in a guy like Mike Washington, okay, what can you do for us on special team? Because how can you be a special teams beast for us? Like that's what that's going to be for me, because I feel like those first two spots are pretty sold up right now as far as from a carry standpoint. But yeah, and I wouldn't be mad at it totally, but like I said, if you're talking about second round, third round, there you got some stuff you need to take care of there. But talking about fourth, sixth, seventh, maybe. Not that he'll be available around that time, but
Right.
I'm just saying that's the type of guy that you're looking for, someone who can play on special teams for you, especially if they're playing the running back position.
Yeah, and I mean, worst case scenario, you do have a little bit, you kind of have that insurance already, hoping that Brian Robinson is healthy enough to be that, but you at least already have that insurance in the running back room so that, yeah, he might be somebody who you shift into special teams. And then if you need the support, hopefully not for injury purposes, but then you could have him as a support in the running back room. But for you, Aaron, kind of what is that signal to you that the Falcons brought him in for a visit, just in terms of what they might be looking to add to the running back room or, to Jarvis's point, special teams?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting that this visit happened about 3 weeks ago. So prior to the Falcons signing Brian Robinson, and I think that signing kind of changes the math in terms of how you view Mike Washington. But at the time of the visit, like, the Falcons didn't have an RB2. And you look at a player like Mike Washington with his size and his speed combination, you're like looking at that and you're like, hey, that would look pretty good, as a 1-2 punch with Bijan Robinson at that point. But obviously with the additions of Brian Robinson Jr. as well as Tyler Goodson, it does feel like the Falcons probably came away from that visit being like, yeah, I don't know if this guy's going to be available where we would ideally like to get him, which is probably day 3 of the draft, in that 4th, 5th round range, because I've seen a lot of projections because of how, unique Mike Washington's skill set is in terms of that size and speed, where a lot of people are expecting him to be one of the first 3 or 4 running backs off the board. And that's probably going to be in like round 3 or so at that point in time. And as Jarvis so eloquently put it, like, let's not be drafting backup running backs with one of these top 2 selections in the draft when we could use some starters at a couple of other spots,
Yes.
and even guys that are at positions that may not start right away. It's like, well, there's a clear path for those guys to start maybe in year 2, like an offensive tackle or something like that. And, there ain't no clear path for an RB2 with Bijan Robinson here. And, you get,
and you don't want there to be one.
Yeah, no, you're getting 8 carries, and that's about it. Like, that's all you're getting, and that's too high in the 3rd round. So I think Mike Washington clearly is, to answer your question, T, was an indicator of what the Falcons were looking for in that RB2, but I think they kind of found their answers for that with the combination. Like, basically Mike Washington, if you could combine Brian Robinson Jr. and Tyler Goodson into the same player, that's probably what Mike Washington Jr. Would potentially bring to the table, but I think they've kind of checked that box now.
Yeah. And I think, to your point too, he's a guy that, or to both of you guys' points, we didn't even get into, because when we gave our mock drafts, we kind of centered our mock drafts around defensive players, whether it's the defensive front or the secondary, and then a little bit around the wide receiver position. We didn't even get into the potential or the possibility for even someone, for an O-lineman, to be drafted, maybe more 3rd round than anything. So yeah, running back is definitely not where you would want to go there. But the Falcons, they absolutely deserve some wins, right? I think they actually got a win before the season even started. They got a win this past weekend. We'll talk about that when we look ahead. So it's official. The Bears won't get compensatory picks for losing Ian Cunningham, the NFL announced. The Falcons, of course, hired Cunningham as their general manager, and the Bears argued that as a result, they should have been rewarded compensatory picks for losing their assistant general manager. Now, this went to appeal, and ultimately the NFL still decided that, hey, we're going to rule in favor of the Falcons, saying, hey, you don't owe any of those comp picks to the Bears for hiring Cunningham. But for you, Jarvis, are you surprised the appeal actually went in the Falcons' favor?
No, not really, because the way the NFL explained how they were going to look at Ian Cunningham's hire is that they viewed Matt Ryan as the final decision maker, with him having that president of football title. So I'm not surprised at all. But however, when you talk about the reason why they are giving out these picks, and it's not coming from the Falcons. So, I ain't really tripping if they were to rule in the Bears' favor. But when you look at the definition of the position or what the rule is, part of it is that he went from assistant general manager to the general manager. So that is a promotion. He is an African-American male who is considered a minority in this place, and he got a promotion. So being that he got a promotion to be a general manager, which is mostly the main leadership position when it comes to making decisions on personnel and all that stuff, the Bears have a case, So I think it's kind of weird that the NFL would kind of find like this small little loophole, because the Falcons just made up this position because nobody has a president of football. Right. Most of the guys have VP of president of football operations, president of football operations, and all that stuff. He doesn't have that. The Falcons made this up. Like, he's president of football. Like, anybody ever had that type before in the league, from my understanding, So, right. But yeah, I wasn't surprised at all when it happened, because simply based off of how the NFL defined it, right?
Yeah, that's fair. And like you mentioned, under the policy that was passed in 2020, it was about helping to promote diversity in the league. Franchises that develop minority personnel into head coaches and GMs of other teams are to be compensated with third-round picks in consecutive drafts. But on the same token, the league said that, hey, you're not going to receive compensation picks because essentially, just like you said, it's the leadership structure with the Falcons that kind of poses a maybe unbeknownst loophole prior to 2026. Right. So for you, Aaron, just understanding the nuances of it and that little thing that kind of makes the structure of the Falcons different, were you surprised that they eventually won the appeal and compensatory picks will have to be given?
No, I'm not surprised, because the NFL stands for No Fun League. And as Jarvis put it, like, they're really being sticklers about that whole notion of primary executive, as opposed to, and it's just like, all right, man, like, whatever. Like, everybody, everybody, Falcons people and Bears people agree, like, this doesn't make any sense intuitive. Like, the common sense thing is, even if you're not going to give them the full, I think it's like 2 third-round picks. It's like, give them one, like what? Like, it's just, that's the common sense way of approaching this. But like, it's the NFL, so it's just like, well, they find guys like $50,000 because your socks are an inch too short or whatever, and it's just like, all right, this is just stupid. But it's a weird rule that the NFL has adopted when it came to this. It's, as Jarvis said, Matt Ryan is the president of football, and that means he's the president of football, not just in Atlanta. He's the president of football in North America. He's the president of football on the planet, right? Anywhere there's football played, right? And we're not just talking about American football, okay? Not just American football. We're talking about European football. Yes, football. So when Matt Ryan walks into the FIFA offices, he could be like, I'm the president of all. President of football. Yes. So, I get it. I get why the NFL is doing this, to honor the fact that he is the president of all football that's ever been played in the history of this galaxy. But like, Ian Cunningham's still the GM. He's the primary football decision maker, even though Matt Ryan is the primary football executive of all football, American football, Australian football, all of the football, Zorbian football in the Crab Nebula or something across the galaxy, all of that football. I get it, because he's the president of football, but let's throw the Bears a bone. Like, everybody knows this is a silly rule.
Yeah, exactly. And the Bears did, of course, give a statement, if you will. Ryan Poles said, hey, we just want to make it very clear. We'll see what happens going forward. This was, of course, before the ruling on the final appeal, but he said, hey, there's a set of rules that's been in place that can be applied to this situation. But for us, it wasn't the opportunity to continue to promote Ian Cunningham and then ultimately to see him get a GM job. It was never about the compensation picks. It's just that they were out to make sure that to the letter of the law, in all fairness, the Bears should still be compensated. And yeah, Aaron, you would have expected in the appeal. I know I thought maybe it would just be kind of like a split the middle. Like, no, we're not going to give you all the comp picks, but maybe we'll just give you one of the comp picks and you can feel like you at least walked away with something based on what the rule states and based on what you did with Ian Cunningham while he was in your organization. But hey, sometimes people split verbs differently. So there's that. Anyway, one more thing I was excited about was I saw that the Ravens started voluntary workouts today. Of course, you get to start early because if you have a new head coach, that's something that the league does for you, sort of in a compensatory type of space there, if you will. So the Ravens, with Jesse Minter as their new head coach, they'll be starting off-season voluntary workout programs today, and the Falcons will be starting tomorrow. So I don't know. I got excited because I was like, all right, we're talking about the draft. We're talking about voluntary off-season activities. I don't know about you guys, but that kind of made me excited. Like, all right, football, real football is coming. It's coming.
Yes, the pollen is in the air, T. And,
yes.
The guys are pulling up with the powdered, yellow powdered BMWs, Benzes, Raptors, and all these different luxury cars that I can't afford right now.
Right now, exactly.
Right now. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to be in positive outlook in life. You know what I'm saying? It's not going to be negative. But yeah, this is pretty cool, and with this new regime and Kevin Stefanski coming into the fold and, and Jeff Ulbrich coming back and, Tommy Reese being the OC, like he's just really going to get a chance for them guys to like really kind of get their eyes on these guys and be able to talk to these guys in person because, they've been in contact, but, they haven't been able to like really see them. So all of them, so to speak, some guys have been working out, rehabbing and all that stuff. We know they talked to Mike Penix. He's been up there every day, every day, like 7 days a week, because every time one of those guys turn on a microphone and get asked about Michael Penix, he's been in here, he's in the building. He's in the building. I was like, okay, all right, we're good. We understand the man's doing what he's supposed to do, but seriously though, all the other guys that are going to come into the building, I think that it kind of signifies like, hey, we might have some guys running around in some shorts and jerseys pretty soon here. So, and I think that the players getting in there to really interact with Kevin Stefanski and see the type of guy that he really is. Not to saying that he's been lying to him, but like you can get a feel for a guy the first time you meet him in person. You can really understand like what he's all about. So the players are going to get an opportunity to do that, and I think Kevin going to get an opportunity to do that as well. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, Aaron.
Yeah, pollen.
Freeze version of excitement.
Yeah.
It's tempered.
Not normal human beings' excitement, right? But just Freeze version of it. Yeah, man, it's all right.
I was like, do I answer this honestly, or do I pretend to be a normal person?
Please.
Yes, please. We know who you are. Just tell us how you feel.
I know how you're gonna answer this question. Go ahead.
Right.
I can't wait.
No, you're right. It's nice that we've gotten to this point in the offseason, which means we're one step closer. People are actually in the building, other than Michael Penix, right? Because we know he's in the building.
He's been turning the lights on there.
Like he's making sure like all the trash is taken out, all the coffee filters are in there. He's been in that building.
There's paper in the paper copy.
Fresh coffee.
He's like, here you go. But
how did we get here?
Now that everybody else,
how did we get here?
I don't know. Now that everybody else is in the building, now they can share in all of that. And so we're one step closer. We got the voluntary workouts, we got the mini camp in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
Draft. Then we're going to get into the rookie mini camps, and then we get to that mandatory mini camp, and that's where really when the drama starts. Because like, who's going to show up for mandatory? Does somebody not show up, and does that mean that they're unhappy with the contract, or there's something like something else? And then we get to that's the drama. That's the part I'm looking forward to.
That's when Free gets excited by everybody.
So I need the content. I need the drama. And so we're just one step closer to the drama. So that's where I get really excited. So yes, we're getting there. We're getting there.
That's fair. That's fair because that's when you start to really kind of the raising of the eyebrows, if you will, more so less about who reported, more about who didn't. Yeah. So for all intents and purposes, that's the kind of thing that makes Aaron excited, guys. The drama. And for Jarvis, the petty. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Falcons Squad show your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked on Falcons with your petty host, Aaron Freeman, and your drama-filled host, Aaron Freeman, as your second listen, and his frequent petty contributor, Jarvis Davis. The Falcons Squad show and Locked on Falcons are part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. We will see you next time.